Grumpy Cat can get its own fucking movie. But Young Justice and Green Lantern the animated series can't even stay on for 2 or 1 season. Or What does this have to do with the rest of the video, you may ask? Absolutely nothing. I just like to point out very, very, very sad things. So, today I'm going to be reviewing Superman 2, the Richard Donner cut, released in 2006 to coincide with the release of Superman Returns. Now, in my last video talking about the theatrical version of Superman 2 done by director Richard Lester, it came off as a really, really, really negative review, which I didn't really at all intend to. But I didn't give it a negative rating. I gave it a 7.5 out of 10, which isn't at all a negative rating in my opinion. It's very decent. I mean, the Richard Lester version of Superman 2 is a decent movie in my opinion. Not a great movie, but a decent one. But the Richard Donner cut, in my opinion, is the definitive version of Superman 2 and in the definitive Superman sequel. So I just like the Donner cut way more compared to the Richard Lester cut. But as a whole, and of the Richard Lester cut of Superman 2 standing on its own, it still is a very good movie. So I'll tell you what. In the beginning of this video, I'm going to focus on what both the Richard Donner cut of Superman and the Richard Lester cut of Superman 2 got right. And then I'll go into talking about what I liked about the Richard Donner cut, what I didn't like about the Richard Donner cut, and then talking about some leftover stuff that I forgot to talk about in the Richard Lester cut. So that's it, let's get started. Now, what both cuts of this movie got right was, well, one, the acting, which I think kind of goes without saying at this point. Christopher Reeve as Superman is amazing, in my opinion, the definitive Superman and probably many people's favorite Superman of all time. I really can't think of any other Superman besides him. He just does an absolutely amazing job as both Clark Kent and as Superman. So instead of just talking about him more and pretty much saying the exact same thing, I'm just going to go to the next actress, or, actor or actress, who is Margot Kidder as Lois Lane, who brings, again, a whole new life to the character and turns a relatively, boring and two-dimensional character to an upbeat three-dimensional character, and is overall one of my all-time favorite characters in the definitive version of Lois Lane, in my opinion. I apologize about that. And then we also have Gene Hackman as one of our villains, Lex Luthor, who's probably the funniest part about both of these movies. You don't need slapstick or dumb moments in the background to make people laugh. You just need Gene Hackman as Lex Luthor. He just brings an absolute, great enthusiasm and humor to the character that is probably the best part about these two Superman movies. Well, not the best part, but one of the best parts, definitely. And it is kind of, sad that they didn't use a more evil, more, crazy evil Lex Luthor. But again, this was a version of the character that was available at the time, not the one that we all know now. So I give them credit for that. But then we also have our next villain, who is General Zod, played by Terrence Stamp, who is an absolutely awesome villain in this, and probably one of the most iconic villains with some of the most quotable and memorable lines ever. Now, you're probably asking why I'm not going to be talking about, villains such as, Non or Ursa, who pretty much tag along with Zod in this. Well, one, Non, he pretty much doesn't really even have a line in the movie, so talking about the actor who played him is kind of pointless. I mean, the only lines I remember him having was grunt and grunt. And then Ursa was pretty much just a female counterpart or version of Zod, so it's kind of pointless talking about the person that played her. She did a good job, but, it's kind of pointless to keep on talking about that. So I'm just going to get to what everyone wants me to talk about, who is General Zod. He was an awesome villain in this movie, and it definitely upped the ante for Superman villains. I mean, in the first movie we had Lex Luthor, who is just a simple average human, and now we have pretty much a darker, evil version of Superman, which is really awesome. But not only just one dark version of Superman, but 3 versions of, an evil Superman. So that's really awesome. They all have pretty much the same powers as him. It's really awesome. It was just a huge, it was just a definitely great escalation from this villain to, these awesome villains. So I really did like that. Something that both movies also did right was the score. The score for this movie is, of course, great with the, memorable, which is definitely an understatement, and definitely is just not even scratching the surface, the memorable John Williams Superman line. In the Richard Lester cut, it's actually kind of toned down a little bit, and it sounds like a B-grade version of of that, kind of like one that you hear like a school band doing. So that was one of my other little minor problems with the Richard Lester cut of Superman. But the Richard Donner cut is still upbeat and awesome and just sounds absolutely epic and cool. And that was something that I think I forgot to talk about in my Superman, the movie from 1987 review. 1978, sorry about that. The score is absolutely amazing. This is probably one of the best film scores pretty much ever. It's just absolutely memorable and amazing, and it just feels absolutely epic and just all around awesome. Something that both also got right were the effects and the action. The effects still hold up very much today. There are some moments like the first Superman movie where you could tell that it really is fake, but they still are really, really great and still hold up to this day. And definitely are some great 80s effects. The 80s was pretty much like the best era of special effects that were practical and not done in a computer, that were bullshit like today's CGI and the overuse of that. And the action was also great. Again, I have to bring up the, fight scene in Metropolis, which is like pretty much the last and final fight scene, and it's just absolutely amazing. And it's the definitive fighting scene, the definitive action scene with any Superman movie, in my opinion, and pretty much anything in Superman in general. It's just absolutely epic and awesome, and it's the perfect time. It doesn't go too long, it's not too short, it's just the right time, and Superman gets to fight every single one of the Kryptonian criminals at least once, which is really, really awesome. The story, for the most part, is actually really good in both parts. It definitely does try to make Superman a more human character and show that even a perfect character like Superman goes through dilemmas, beside fighting villains. Like, in the movie, Superman loses his powers. Well, not really loses them. He actually gets rid of them in order to be with Lois Lane in this movie, and he finds out that that was a huge mistake because the three Kryptonian criminals, Ursa, Non, and General Zod, arise, and Superman figures out that he made a huge mistake and has to, get back his powers and fight these guys off. That was something that I really did like. It made Superman actually a very human character, both literally and, metaphorically. Metaphorically because he made a big mistake, and all humans make big mistakes, while, physically and actually, literally, he becomes human because, well, he has his powers taken away. That was something that I did like, but the problem with it is that the execution of one version of Superman 2, pretty much, the execution isn't really all done that well. You want to guess which one that is? It's the Superman 3 version of Superman 2. It's the Richard Lester version, okay? I didn't really like the one in the Richard Lester version of Superman 2 because it went by too fast, and it didn't really feel like it was built up all that much. Or, it definitely just didn't feel epic, and I'll go into why in a minute. But right now I'm going to get to some of the stuff that the Richard Donner cut got right. And one is that all the silly things that I, hated Superman 2, the Richard Lester version of, all the silly stuff is taken out of it, such as the slapstick and, just all the dumb stuff that didn't really, make a whole lot of sense. Just the overall silly moments that I didn't like, such as the slapstick and the made-up powers, such as, the cellophane throwing of the ass, that was just dumb. All the silly moments are taken out of it, and I didn't like the silly moments because they just overshadowed all the big, giant, epic moments. And both because the big, giant, epic moments were taken out of the, Richard Lester version, and now they are here for the Richard Donner version, which is the reason why I like the Richard Donner version more. Also, this movie actually explains how Clark Kent gets back his powers, and I'll go into more about this in the Richard Lester cut. The Lester cut, later in the movie, Clark Kent figures that he made a huge mistake by getting rid of his powers, and he later goes back to the Fortress of Solitude to get his powers back, which is a giant plot hole in and of itself. One, how the hell did Clark Kent get back to the Fortress of Solitude without, how did he get back to the Fortress of Solitude without dying? Because he gets beat up in, a diner by this one douchebag truck driver guy, and he literally looks like the moment that he got his ass kicked, he just got up and was like, I'm just gonna go get my powers back. And he walks all the way to Antarctica, and he walks all the way back to the Fortress of Solitude. How did he do that without, dying of, severe cold weather? How did he not die? And he doesn't have, any, snow gear or anything. And again, I want to remind you, he doesn't have his powers. Maybe some people might, complain, well, he didn't, he walked to the Fortress of Solitude in the first movie. Well, he had his powers in the first movie. Here, he doesn't. How does he survive the cold, the severe cold weather? And, how does he just not die? He looks like he got his ass kicked before, and then he just starts walking to, the Fortress of Solitude, and, like, just a jacket, just, like, a plain jacket, and he still lives. Even as a kid, I was just like, how did he live? That's so stupid. That's just one thing that bothered me. But the movie, the Donner cut, actually explains how he got his powers. He says, Superman, gets his ass kicked in a diner. He figures, I need my powers back, so he goes back, and in the Lester cut, he finds a green crystal in the Fortress of Solitude. And then it just cuts back to Metropolis, and we're just left to assume that he got his powers back. But here, in the Donner cut, it explains and shows us how he got his, powers back. The green crystal apparently summoned Jor-El, and Jor-El was like, I'm really disappointed in you, son. Why did you do this? And, Superman or Clark Kent is all like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do this. And he's just like, and Jor-El's just like, okay, here's powers. I did like that. I like that they sort of went into more, like how he got, his powers back, instead of just cutting away, not, explaining, and they cut away in the Lester version because they didn't want to pay Marlon Brando. I just really didn't like that all that much. I was just, I didn't like that. And going back to the whole Jor-El thing, the Donner cut has, all the Jor-El scenes in this movie, which definitely does, again, add to the huge epic tone. Just makes the movie more epic, and it makes a lot more sense to have Jor-El in this than Lara in the Lester cut. Lara was put into the Lester cut because they had taken all of the Marlon Brando scenes out of that to save money, and, they replaced it with Susanna York as Lara, Superman's mom. And it just makes more sense to have Jor-El in there, because Superman would be more accustomed to talking to Jor-El, because Jor-El is the one that sent him to Earth. He's the one that learned, all about Earth, and he's the guy that sent Superman or Clark Kent to Earth. So it would make more sense for Superman to talk to Jor-El in a time of need. I just like that a lot more. It added to the whole, father-son story element of Superman 2. And it just made everything feel more epic. And everything that Brando says is just absolutely awesome and epic. And his delivery just adds so much weight to it. Pretty much any scene with him and Christopher Reeve in this movie is absolutely amazing. And it's definitely must-see for any Superman fan. And he just sounds like completely disappointed. Like, if you ever thought that your parents sounded disappointed with something that you did that was pretty stupid, go watch this guy. I mean, parents of America should just play this scene anytime that their kid does something stupid. They will regret it for the rest of their lives. It's just like, I can't believe I did that. That's horrible. I'm a freaking idiot. I'm gonna go and do something better. It's that, epic and awesome and just all around cool. So, parents of America, show your kids that scene. It's pretty awesome. Donner cut, look it up. Something that I also like that the Donner cut did right is that the epic tone is clear, and it's here, and it's not just in the background taking a backseat to the slapstick and, just the dumb, silly moments in the movie. It's in the forefront, and it's here, and it just feels like the definitive epic Superman sequel that many fans have wanted to see, since they first heard about it, and since they were first promised after seeing the first Superman movie. It just feels like a sequel that just lives up or exceeds the original Superman movie, and it just feels just epic. And after the movie ends with that kick-ass John Williams theme coming in, you just feel like, oh my god, it was just such an awesome movie. After watching the Lester cut, I was just like, it was good, I thought it was alright, but watching the Donner cut, it just felt like an awesome, epic Superman sequel that I absolutely loved, and probably a lot of other people will love. I'm trying to see what else. One thing I also liked is that it was a really connected sequel, and what I mean by that is, Donner had shot both Superman 1 and 2 simultaneously, and, he wanted both movies to be really connected, and he pretty much wanted Superman 2 not just be a sequel, but a part 2, pretty much a continuation, and, of the first Superman movie. He wanted actually the first Superman, to leave up on a big cliffhanger with the Kryptonian criminals, getting freed from the Phantom Zone. It was just going to end there. And he wanted this to be pretty much just that part 2. But the Lester cut, it just felt like a sequel. It didn't really feel like an actual, continuation of the first movie. It just felt like a sequel. Here, it definitely does, in some parts, feel like a very big, awesome, epic continuation. And a good example of this, a good example of it that's a great continuation, and a good example of how the movie is very connected to the first movie, is that At the end of the first movie, Superman, he throws, one of the nuclear missiles into space to, stop it from, killing a whole bunch of people in one city. And that same missile pretty much blows up in space and releases the 3 Kryptonian criminals, Ursa, Nan, and Zod, from the Phantom Zone. And it's just great. It's a great, way to tie, the first movie in with the second movie. The Donner cut opens up with, like, a recap of the last movie with, Superman being, having a chain of kryptonite, around his neck, and Lex Luthor, shooting off the missiles, and Superman being saved by Miss Tessmacher, and Superman flying off and throwing the thing into space, and the thing blowing up and freeing the Kryptonian criminals. It was awesome. And the movie also opens up with the Jor-El, trial scene, which was absent from the first movie, which I understand you had to cut Marlon Brando's scenes out of it, but he was there during the trial. His vote had to be unanimous for, them to be put in the Phantom Zone. It just made a lot more sense to have that, at least that one scene in that movie. And it was stock footage, so it kind of made sense to put it in the, Lester cut, but it wasn't. But, that's just a whole other complaint for another day. So that pretty much wraps up, hold on. Yeah, that pretty much wraps up what the Donner cut did right. Some of the minor problems that I have with the Donner cut are this, such as, how did Clark, well, I already, talked about that. How did Clark get to the Fortress of Solitude without dying? Already talked about that. And in this version, they actually does turn back time again. At the end of the movie, Superman flies around the, world so fast that it turns back time, and that everything that the Kryptonian criminals did, such as, messing up Metropolis, and Lois Lane figuring out that Clark Kent and, Superman are the same person, that all never happened. Superman, pulls that off again in this movie, and some people might be saying, oh, that's such a cop-out, they never, thought of an ending. Well, that was actually supposed to be the ending for Superman 2. Superman 2 was just supposed to be, again, Superman 1 was supposed to leave up on a cliffhanger, and this movie was supposed to conclude that by having Superman fly around the world so fast that, it turned back time and pretty much brought everything back to the status quo. So I didn't really, mind that being in here. But it still doesn't make any sense at all. Again, the logistics of that are just so stupid and fucking dumb. Like, everyone would have been flung off the planet instead of, the time would have reversed itself. Or, wouldn't there have been 2 Supermen, or 2 Supermans, or men, whatever, I don't know how to pronounce that. It just doesn't make any sense. Like, it didn't make sense in the first movie, it didn't make sense here. It was just an all-around dumb and cheesy scene. Then again, I am talking about a movie, about a guy in, blue and red spandex flying around, kicking the shit out of, guys in black spandex, so gotta give him, some, leeway. Something else that I also didn't like was, at the end of this, he stops the Kryptonian criminals by reversing the molecule chamber and making the Kryptonian criminals into everyday humans. The Kryptonian criminals, he throws the Kryptonian criminals pretty much to the bottom of the Fortress of Solitude. And I will get to that in a minute with the original Lester cut. But something that happens is that, Lex Luthor is there, and he's just like, you did it, you stopped in Superman, and Lois Lane and, Superman fly off to the sidelines of the Fortress of Solitude, and out of nowhere, Superman uses his laser vision, or heat vision, however you call it, and he literally blows up the Fortress of Solitude. And remember, just Lois and, Superman fly off to the sidelines of the Fortress of Solitude, and then you're just sort of left there thinking, Superman just killed Lex Luthor. I mean, I understand that I've seen later, flies around the planet so fast and turns back time, but that's still pretty damn dark. Did he kill Lex Luthor? And, the Kryptonian criminals are at the bottom of, fell, through the little cracks of, the, Fortress of Solitude. Did he kill them too? I mean, Superman, I never saw Superman kill anybody, so that's kind of dark. Like, that's really dark, Superman. Stop killing people. That's up to many other superheroes. But stop killing people, Superman. That was just dark. That was weird. I know he flies back, around, planet, turns back time, which, again, doesn't make any sense, but it was just kind of dark. I didn't really like that all that much. And something I also didn't like was, how did the truck driver or anyone else in the diner where Clark Kent got his ass kicked know about Clark Kent? And what I mean by that is, So again, Superman flies around the planet so fast and turns back time before anything ever in Superman 2 happened, which kind of makes Superman 2 pointless, but whatever. How did anyone in the diner know that Superman, or how did anyone know who Clark Kent was? Like, again, he flew around so fast that the world, everything in Superman 2, the events of Superman 2 never happened. How did anyone know who Clark Kent was in that diner? It didn't make any sense at all. Well, actually, now that you think of it, no one said that they knew that was Clark Kent. No one said, oh, hey, it's that guy that had his ass whooped. Maybe, because he just said, Clark Kent walked in and he was like, that's funny, I never saw garbage eat garbage before, which is an awesome line, by the way. I mean, maybe that guy was just insulted. He's like, oh, yeah, you want to fight? Let's fight. Maybe he didn't know who Clark Kent was. Maybe he just wanted to fight the guy because, maybe he just wanted to fight Clark Kent because the guy's an asshole. So, maybe it was that. I don't know. I guess it was kind of left ambiguous. But, if it is the case that they still knew who he was after, flying around the world so fast, that turned back time, that's a really big plot hole. But if it's left to the whole ambiguous thing, then I guess it's fine. And now we get to some of the Richard Lester cut problems left over from the Richard Lester cut that I, just personally, thought was, that I just sort of left out of there because I was just pressed for time. I already talked about, Clark Kent. How did he not die getting to the Fortress of Solitude? Again, Clark Kent's powers, how did he get them back? And the Lester cut, they just sort of, they just show him finding the green crystal, and they cut back to Metropolis, just sort of leaving you to assume they got his powers back. Didn't like that at all. I really wish that they had fixed that. But then again, that's why we have the Donner cut. Also, what happened to Ursa, Non, and Zod? Like, Superman, he reverses the molecule chamber to make sure that, Ursa, Non, and Zod are now human and that he can affect them and they can affect him. And he just throws them across the Fortress of Solitude and they all fall into the cracks and we never see him again. And we're just sort of left to assume, did he kill them? Like, did he die? Like, did they kill him? Well, actually, it is explained in a deleted scene, which can be found on the Donner cut, which do show them being escorted by, Antarctica policemen. I don't know who they were, but it shows them being escorted by, policemen or whatever, so I guess that complaint was kind of weird. But why would you take that out of the movie? That's the big problem. Why would you take that out of the movie? Because it kind of leads them to assume, are they just in the Fortress of Solitude all this time? Are they just like rats in they're just like rats in like this house or whatever? Just really they're just sort of lurking around in the Fortress of Solitude. That's kind of weird. I really wish they had kind of left that scene in there. It is, and it definitely does, it definitely does answer the question, what happened to them, and also what happened to Lex Luthor, because they just see them flying off, Lois and Clark just flying off to Metropolis. We don't know what happened to those villains. Did they die, or was it just an endless pit? What happened to Lex Luthor? Did he go to jail? Did Superman drop him off on the way to going back to Metropolis? Did he just drop him off in jail like in the first movie? I don't know. I really wish that they left that, deleted scene, there in the movie. And you can find it on the Richard Donner cut, or you could probably just find it online, but I found it on the Richard Donner cut, so there you go. Something I also didn't like was, again, the jokes, the slapstick, pretty much take away from the movie. I already went on about that, moving on. And also the, mind erasing kiss. It's still stupid, it's still dumb, and I absolutely hate it. It's just stupid, and again, it adds to the whole just making up powers for Superman. I really hate that, and a lot of other people do. So, and also, yeah, that pretty much covers it. The Richard Donner version of, Superman 2 is, in my opinion, the definitive Superman sequel, ever. This and Superman 1 and Superman 2, the Richard Donner cut, are both the definitive version, the definitive Superman story, in my opinion, and I haven't seen any other Superman story better than that yet. I absolutely loved, Superman 1. I thought it was great, and many of you know. I absolutely love this movie, as I just told you. The Richard Lester cut, standing on its own and standing as just its own standalone Superman movie, I still think it's good. I think it's a decent movie, but I definitely don't think that it lives up to the first movie all that much. I definitely don't think tone-wise it at all lives up to the first movie. It's very decent, and I definitely do think that you should still watch that, and you definitely should still watch that. But if you are looking for a movie that definitely a sequel to the first Superman movie that lives up to the first Superman movie or exceeds the first movie, Richard Donner cut is where you're at. Yes, sure, some things are kind of cut together sloppily, like one scene where it's the screen test of, Margot Kidder and Christopher Reeves, and it obviously shows, which is a great scene, by the way, where Lois uses, blanks and a gun to find out that Clark Kent is Superman. That was really clever and awesome, and Margot Kidder does a great job in that. Same thing with Christopher Reeves. But this movie definitely is the definitive Superman sequel, in my opinion, and tone-wise, it just works, and it's absolutely amazing in the special effects department, action, acting, pretty much everything is great about this movie, and that's why I'm going to give it the same rating that I gave it, the first Superman movie, which is a 9 out of 10, Red Suns, and I highly recommend you see this. I definitely did have some minor problems with it, but overall, I definitely, looked at the pros instead of the cons. It definitely did a great job complimenting the first movie, and I am very glad that Richard Donner, after many years, finally got to make this and finish this movie, which he very, very much wanted to, and I'm very glad that fans can now have two versions of Superman 2, one with a lot more jokes and a lot more humor, and one with an epic tone that finishes the story of Superman 1 and Superman 2 in a nice, sort of title book ending. I really did like that. So overall, I absolutely love the Richard Donner cut. I like the Richard Lester cut, but I highly recommend you guys see the Donner cut over the Lester cut. But I still do, recommend that you see the Richard Lester cut as sort of a compare and contrast between the two. So I give, again, the Richard Donner cut of Superman 2 a 9 out of 10 Red Suns, as I gave the first Superman movie. And this video is almost at 30 minutes, so I'm going to end it right here. So I'll see you guys next time when I review Superman 3. Or as my made-up subtitle for the movie is Superman 3, The Downfall of a Franchise. So I'll see you guys then. Wish me luck. Oh, God.